Good morning, everyone. My name's Tim. I'm a site historian here at the Edison and Ford Winter Estates. And today, my digital step into history is about a man named Ewald Stulpner. He was a Fort Myers pioneer, a leading citizen, and an Edison caretaker. Of all the Edison caretakers, Ewald Stulpner effected the most change at Edison's Winter Estates, helping to transform it from a sandy, weed-ridden lot into a tropical garden paradise, inspiring the Edisons to become regular winter residents. Ewald Stulpner. So once he took over as Edison's caretaker in 1891, he was 28 years old. He was hired by a man named Major Evans, who happened to be Thomas Edison's property manager at the time. He was paid $40 a month and he stayed rent-free in the caretaker cottage on our property. Now, he acted during his time here. He oversaw the estate during the years the Edisons reacquainted themselves with Fort Myers. After their 14-year absence, he acted as agent, coordinating various projects on the property between local contractors and the Edisons, as well as becoming a leading citizen of Fort Myers. Stulpner's activities on the property would earn him a place of prominence amongst local citizens for the rest of his life. Now, as an employee here at the museum, I started a research project on all the caretakers that have worked on the Edison Winter Estates. And it's not an easy research project because a lot of them these are the untold stories, the unnamed heroes behind the scenes. These are the people that provided the Edisons with this beautiful property. As soon as I came upon Ewald Stulpner, something attracted me to him. And it was the fact that he became a community leader here also, and he was able to parlay his time here as Edison's caretaker into becoming a community leader, a business leader, and a lifetime beloved citizen. So that's really what this is about. So Ewald Stulpner was an immigrant pioneer who, like so many others, came to the United States in hope of starting a new life of economic prosperity. Shortly after arriving in New York, Stulpner came to Fort Myers to start his life as an American. So you had to be a real pioneer-minded person to leave the comforts of the big city of New York and come down here to Fort Myers, Florida. As a matter of fact, on December 10th, 1884, at age 22, he arrived and the first thing he did here was he helped establish a coconut grove south of Fort Myers for Captain Creamer of the Diston Land Company. Once the grove was established, he moved on to run a citrus grove for Judge Cranford, who purchased a 200-acre farm a short distance upriver from the town proper, Fort Myers. Stulpner took over as the caretaker of Edison's Fort Myers estate in June of 1891 at age 28. Now, for $40 a month, he was able to stay here rent-free. In June of 1891, he had already made an impression, inspiring Major Evans to write Thomas and let him know he is now doing good work, and since he has been on the place, has made great improvement as the place needed work badly. He replaced William Hipple, the first caretaker, who was really just not doing much around here. And as a matter of fact, it was Thomas Edison's father who was a regular winter guest here during Edison's absence that they wrote some letters, not too complimentary letters about William Hibble. So Stulpner was hired to replace Hibble, and his green thumb became even more noticeable to the locals here in the area. So an 1892 news press article reported that Mr. Stulpner raised a fine crop of watermelons on the property, one of which weighed 24 pounds. So he's already getting some local prominence here. As a matter of fact, the minute he was hired, it was in the news press. Mr. Ewald Stulpner has been engaged to take charge of Professor Thomas A. Edison's good winter home in the city. It is a good selection as Ewald is a worker. So he already had a reputation from Judge Cranford's citrus orchard, Captain Creamer's coconut grove, that he would be the right match. And as a matter of fact, Ewald himself said that he noticed an ad in the paper. He had heard that Edison was looking for someone who would be good at taking care of tropical plants, so he applied for the job. In November of that year, Ewald took a trip. In 1894, Ewald took a trip to Germany. It was reported in the news press, and upon his return aboard the ship Moravia, almost a year later, in October of 1895, Ewald returned from another trip to New York with his new bride, Martha, whom he fell in love with on the return voyage from Germany a year earlier. So Ewald was a traveler. He went over to Germany. On the way back, he falls in love with his new bride, Martha, and he went back up to New York in 1895 to marry her, and then he brought her back to Fort Myers. So she also was a pioneer. And Stulpner's grove included oranges, grapefruit, lemon, guavas, tamarinds, citrons, pawpaw, and dates. Ewald was a regular contributor to the local fair, providing a variety of plants and fruit representative of what was grown on Edison's winter estate. So every year at the county fair, Ewald had a plethora of fruit. He also contributed bamboo. One year he built a bamboo walkway into the fair, so he was very productive here, and he became pretty famous quickly as Edison's caretaker. In February of 1895, a news press report states, "We can assure all our visitors that they will be greatly repaid by a visit to Professor T.A. Edison's laboratory in this city. Mr. Ewald Stulpner, who has charge of the place, will be pleased to show visitors around the property." As caretaker of Edison's estate, he built a reputation in the 1890s that led to local prominence and influence in Fort Myers. So even though the Edisons weren't here, Ewald would give tours of Thomas Edison's laboratory. You see a picture of it right there. He would walk them around the estate and show of all the improvements, that botanical improvements that were going on. In June of 1900, Ewald was elected an officer of the Royal Palm Lodge 16 of the Knights of Pythias. The Knights of Pythias was a national society promoting friendship, charity, and benevolence through community service, fellowship, and social events. So Ewald, right away, with the help of Major Evans, became part of the community leadership. And also in 1900, he was elected an officer of the lodge. He was a National Society promoter of the lodge. As a matter of fact, the lodge, a National Society of Friendship, Charity, and Benevolence through community, service, fellowship, and social events. By 1902, he was elected Master of Finance. So he continued to move up in the Knights of Pythias. He became a city councilman in 1904, a position he held for several terms. He was a secretary for the Lee County Democrats, along with becoming a Mason of the third degree. So Ewald got involved in the community. He was a community leader. The write-up in the local newspaper here stated that Ewald's friend came to town to help him ride the third-degree Masonic goat. So he became a third-degree Mason, which was pretty prominent, especially here in Fort Myers. It was a great position for him to make some political inroads, if you will. And it wasn't just him. Martha, she also became a prominent civic contributor. She hosted teas for the Ladies Missionary Society of the Methodist Church. She was a charter member of the Fort Myers Chapter Order of the Eastern Star and of the local chapter of the Pythian Sisters. She was a dedicated member of the Women's Community Club and was respected and loved by scores of local people. She gave back to the community. She was very involved. Her and Mrs. Edison developed a friendship also. Mrs. Edison was impressed by her civic work here as well. As a matter of fact, Mrs. Edison became a member of the Women's Community Club and no doubt inspired by Martha Stulpner. As early as 1897, Ewald also began to invest in local properties, taking advantage of deals as they presented themselves. He enlarged his personal portfolio in addition to his duties at the Edison estate. He had a 3-room cottage that he rented in the Tolles development. He actually purchased a 200-acre farm on the Estero River and he grew plants out there. So Ewald was very industrious, and he also invested in Lee County. So he was a lifetime resident, and he was planning on being a leader here also. In 1901, his role here at the Edison property was expanded due to the death of Major Evans, who was Edison's property manager. Also, Major Evans was one of the town founders. He owned most of the land in the area post-Civil War. At the time, the Edisons ended their 14-year absence, and they began taking a greater interest in Florida in their vacation property. This began a decade of additions and improvements to their winter home and surrounding grounds, all which Ewald would be intricately involved with. This was the letter Edison wrote to Ewald, and I highlighted what he wrote. In reply of your favor of the 13th, I beg to state that I am very sorry to hear of the death of Major Evans. I will probably be down to Myers with my family about the 27th of February and will arrange about the future. So this is when Ewald took over as Edison caretaker. And property manager / caretaker. So he became much more involved. And, as the Edison caretaker, it was expected to have the place ready for guests who might travel to Fort Myers and occupy Edison's winter home. Even though Edison was absent during the 90s, he had many guests come here. In particular, his father was a frequent guest, and other friends of the family. Sometimes the place was rented, but it was Ewald's responsibility to make sure. He also would let the town know that the Edison family were on their way. So one might also be expected to involve oneself in family matters, such as the case in November of 1901, when Mr. Stulpner received a letter from Thomas Edison instructing him that the Edison boys, Tom and William, who were traveling to Fort Myers, not be allowed to occupy the house under any circumstances. So he was put in a precarious position in this particular instance. So he wasn't just the caretaker, he also had to be a diplomat and in this case, tell William and Tom that they were not allowed to stay in the house. Here you see the quote from the letter. My sons and a party are on their way south. Should they come to Fort Myers and desire to occupy the house, do not allow them to do so under any circumstances. You need not mention that I have given you this order, but just say that you cannot permit them or any party to occupy the house without a written order from me personally. So a little bit of a extra load to be carried by the caretaker, I suppose. In April of 1902, he coordinated the drilling of a well, which was completed on the 9th day. It was 455 feet deep. It pumped 165 gallons of water per minute. This well still sits outside of our museum on the property. To the left, you see the letter that Ewald wrote to Thomas, Mr. Reed, the well driver, finished your well today. He went down 455 feet and inserted 356 feet of 3/4 inch pipe. The flow is pretty good and runs about 165 gallons a minute. In a few days, we shall mail you a bottle of water taken from the 3/4 inch pipe as you requested. So Ewald, he coordinated with all the local contractors, and he was the liaison between Edison, often putting him in these positions of having to pay out of his own pocket until Edison would later send down the payment. In 1901, Ewald painted Edison's laboratory, and he did that himself. He didn't hire anybody to do that. Under his reign in 1902, a boathouse was constructed. The dock was extended to 562 feet and a cistern added for the caretaker house. Ewald painted the new boathouse himself. Improvements were made to the main house. For instance, a bathroom out of a small room upstairs, a bedroom added downstairs, a new French door added to access the porch from the room. Also added were transom windows, a new refrigerator, a new sink in the pantry. The floors were stained, interior walls were painted. Ewald handled all the supervision with the local contractors and kept Mrs. Edison appraised of all progress. These are letters, correspondence between Ewald and Mrs. Edison about all the remodeling and the dock. Mr. Campbell was hired to build the dock. As a matter of fact, the dock ended up being 1,200 feet from shore, and a couple new buildings were added to it. During 1903, a seawall was added, a barn was constructed, an addition of a room, a bathroom, and a back porch to the caretaker house. A fence was built in the river. In addition to that, the dock was extended another 500 feet with a small house at the end. You see they're working on the small house at the end of Edison's Pier in this picture. A water protection shed was built and the riverfront was cleaned of hyacinths. 3 boats were also delivered to the property, and the local paper, the write-up about it, stated that the property was entirely renovated. So big news here in Fort Myers. There's a look at the riverfront before the hyacinths were cleared away. And the hyacinths were an ongoing problem here in Fort Myers. As a matter of fact, they were harvesting and place for mosquitoes, malaria, yellow fever. So the hyacinths along River's Edge were often a problem for property owners, and Ewald saw to it that they were cleared from the river. Dear sir, your seawall will be completed in about a week. It is built as a courting agreement by you with Charles Nicholson and is a good job. The wall is 3 feet high and about 2 feet wide on top. It required somewhat over 125 cubic yards of rock to build and make it and it makes a great improvement to your riverfront. That was a letter Ewald wrote to Mr. Edison in 1903. And there's a look at the seawall that was added to the property. So you can see the Edison property took on a much different look now, a more tropical, a more managed look. The seawall, the construction of the seawall came in two phases, by the way, 1903, and again after the Edisons purchased the Travers property next door, today known as our guest house. When they purchased that, the seawall was extended all the way down to the end of the Edison property. In 1904, Ewald coordinated the shipping of the electric launch, Lillian. He painted it also. Electric poles and wire were installed, and 150 loads of muck were delivered and spread. So the other thing that was ongoing over an entire decade was the delivery of muck to the property, a very sandy property, not conducive for growing plants. Ewald was able to get tons of muck. The entire property eventually got covered with about 10 inches of topsoil to make it better for growing plants. The Edisons wanted a fence built in the river to keep boaters from approaching the property. There's a ad in the local paper. Bids will be received for the construction of a fence about 1,600 foot long in the Caloosahatchee River in front of the Edison place. So Ewald let everyone, all the local carpenters, know that he was taking bids for a fence. In 1906, the fence you see in the picture there that separated Edison's house from the guest house was torn down. So there's a picture of the fence that got torn down in 1906. These are all some of the changes Ewald was in charge of. Of course, the paper kept a close eye on the Edison property, also on Ewald. In 1904, the Stulpners took a much-needed vacation to St. Louis to take in the World's Fair. In 1906, Mr. Stulpner oversaw work to the dock. Campbell was to add 100 feet of dock, 6 feet wide, for $115, which included a 40 by 40 wood platform at the end for $322.50. He was also to build a fence in the river along the property for $520. This was a verbal contract negotiated between Mr. Campbell and Mr. Edison and recorded and witnessed by Ewald Stulpner. So during Edison's winter visit the year before, they made this agreement. And there's the letters written. That's the correspondence between them. So Mr. Edison wanted his 40 by 40 house at the end of the dock to look exactly like the one at the end of the Royal Palm Hotel. So here's the letter. In December of Mr. Edison instructed we to build a house at the end of the dock, exactly like the house at the end of the Royal Palm dock. So he wanted it to look just like the Royal Palm Hotel in downtown Fort Myers. And this was the write-up in the paper following. It was by 1907, it was the longest pier on the Caloosahatchee River. Mr. J.L. Young is engaging in a large pavilion for Professor Thomas A. Edison at the extreme end of the wharf in front of the Edison property. The wharf is now the longest one on the river, and as it is located on a bend in the river, affords a grand view from Redfish Point on the south to the jetties on the northeast. The new pavilion is to be a duplicate of the one at the end of the Hotel Royal Palm dock. The great electrician has been making trips to the fishing grounds this week in his new electric launch and is having a great sport with the fish. So Ewald saw all that happen here on the property. He actually coordinated the arrival of the electric launch, and he also coordinated with Fred Ott the electrification of the dock and pier area. There's a look at the beautiful dock from one end looking at the Edison property. So property looking much more like it does today by this time. There's another beautiful view of some of Ewald's work here on the property. Okay, in 1906, letter from Stulpner to Edison indicated a lush tropical ground. The orange and grapefruit crop on your place is very large this season, and the fruit is slowly beginning to get color. The velvet beans on your new land made quite a lot of vines and are getting beans now. I will try to get a photograph of the patch so you can get an idea of how the place looks. So there's a couple old time views of the Edison property there. Excuse me. I guess we went a little too far there. During this time frame, 1906 to 1908, there was a fountain that was also added to enhance the landscape on the Riverside property. You can see Madeline with a couple friends enjoying the little pool, they called it. On the left is a picture of Ewald, who came back many years later to stand next to the fountain. By 1908, Ewald Stulpner left behind a property much different from the sparsely vegetated grounds he began with in June of 1891. Now, 1921, Mrs. Stulpner passed that May. She was a charter member of the Fort Myers chapter of the Order of the Eastern Star. She was a member of the local Pythian Sisters. She was respected and loved by scores of Fort Myers people who knew of her quietly performed and unobtrusive acts of kindness to those in need, especially the aged and infirm. And that is her, I read that from her obituary. And she embraced all of those principles of the Eastern Star: purity, love, equality, and fidelity. Those are the principles for a pattern, for a good life, a meaningful way of life, the aim and object of all Pythian sisters. Mrs. Stulpner had a huge impact here locally. So we want to give her credit. The Stulpners became renowned citizens in Fort Myers. In 1909, time to move on. So the Stulpners left the Edison property. They moved into their own home on Fowler Street. And Stulpner became an officer and shareholder in the newly incorporated Carl F. Roberts Company. There's a picture of Ewald standing right under the sign. He's the short guy there. It was a building supply dealership. He eventually became vice president of the corporation. In July of 1940, Ewald Stulpner died in a Tampa hospital where he was receiving treatment for an undisclosed illness. He was survived by his daughter Bertha, who also took on a life of service in the local community. So he was a very honored citizen. He was considered a pioneer of Fort Myers. Now, the family legacy. When Bertha May Stulpner, that was their daughter, she was born on July 17th, 1910 in Germany. Her father, Ewald, was 48, and her mother, Martha, was 42. Now, it was hard for me to find out whether the Stulpners adopted or did they actually go to Germany, and did Martha want to give birth to her daughter in her home country? I dug and I couldn't find that answer. But what I do know is she married William Cornelius Louth on the 20th of June, 1938 in Fort Myers, Florida. They had two children during their marriage. She died on December 18th, 2002 in Milton, Florida at the age of 92. Now, after graduating from Florida State College for Women in 1935, she began her teaching career in Fort Myers. She became the principal of Iona High School. She was a member of the executive board of Lee County Teachers and was the Florida State representative of the 1936 National Education Association meeting. The Stulpner reputation in Fort Myers as a community leader and trusted servants to both the Edisons and the community began here at the Edison Winter Estate. The Stulpners connected to the Edisons to Fort Myers. They helped connect the Edisons to the people of Fort Myers. That was probably their biggest role. Mina got more involved. She saw what Martha was doing. The Stulpner reputation in Fort Myers was renowned. Thanks to partly in success to successfully managing and navigating the local affairs of Mr. and Mrs. Edison here in Southwest Florida. Now, Martha Stulpner died in 1921 after a life of service. She was, as I mentioned, respected and loved by others. Ewald died in 1940 at age 78, and Bertha continued the family legacy of giving here locally. So credit to Ewald, Martha, and Bertha for being leading citizens here in Fort Myers. Grateful that you all tuned in for a little story about someone behind the scenes. These are the untold heroes here at the Edison and Ford Winter Estates. Ewald was considered an expert horticulturalist locally here. He was a business leader, and he was also a civic leader here locally. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation on Ewald Stulpner, and I hope you have a great day. You can tune into our YouTube channel by going on our website and viewing all of our Step Into Histories. Look forward to December for Holly's next digital discussion, and I hope to see you again in the future. Thank you for tuning in.